They called me worthless, not behind closed doors or whispered in anger. They said it at my grandfather's funeral, where the military honor guard stood stiff with medals and pride. My father looked me in the eye and muttered, loud enough for the front pew to hear, "She saved no one. She was just there when they died." That sentence echoed through the cemetery like a curse. I stood in full uniform that day, a combat medic with dirt still under my fingernails from the last mission, and felt smaller than I had ever felt in my life. Not because of the insult, but because it came from the people who were supposed to know me best. That was 3 years ago. Since then, I had vanished in every way a person can vanish. My name fell off guest lists. My photo disappeared from the family hallway. Calls were never returned. When I stopped trying, no one noticed. And yet, today, the Commander-in-Chief of the United States stood before a packed audience of decorated generals, lawmakers, and international press and said, "This woman saved more lives than most soldiers see in a lifetime." The air stilled. The cameras clicked. I stood at the center of that hurricane of silence and praise, and all I could hear was that voice again, the one from the funeral, the one that said I was just there when they died. My name is Eliza Monroe. I am 36 years old. I served 14 years in the United States Army as a frontline combat medic, leading some of the most dangerous humanitarian extractions in conflict zones most Americans will never be able to pronounce. But long before I was decorated, I was discarded. Before they called me a hero, they called me invisible. Before I saved 100 lives, I lost the 3 that haunted my name. And long before the stars on my collar were pinned by the president himself, I learned how to stitch wounds with no one clapping, how to carry blood on my hands and still report for duty the next day. So when I stood on that stage, under spotlights hotter than any desert I had deployed in, and heard the leader of the free world say, "Eliza Monroe, you have redefined what it means to serve," I did not cry. I did not bow. I simply looked into the crowd, found my father's eyes, and nodded once. Because I was no longer asking to be seen. I had already learned how to make the whole world look. My name had never held weight in my household. Not in the way Travis's did. My older brother, Major Travis Monroe, was the embodiment of every generational military dream my family had ever nurtured. Tall, charismatic, a fighter pilot with flawless posture and a smirk that made grown men lean in. Our father, Colonel Arthur Monroe, retired but ever rigid, used to say Travis was born for command. I, apparently, was born for compliance. I was different, always had been. Where Travis charged ahead, I observed. Where he delivered sharp salutes, I delivered tourniquets under gunfire. I didn't match their mold of a soldier. I didn't shout orders or wear mirrored aviators. I wore blood, mostly not mine, and I carried lives on my back, not legacies. I chose the path of the healer, not the conqueror. And in a family where value was measured by how loudly you could break down a door, my quiet devotion to patching others back together was mistaken for weakness. I was 36, 5'6", with a frame more resilient than graceful. My skin bore the tan of sun-scorched deployments, and my eyes, dark and steady, had seen enough pain to turn storms into background noise. I wore my hair in a tight, low bun, not for regulation, but to keep the sweat from my brow when carrying stretchers through fire. My uniform was desert fatigues, worn thin at the cuffs. No ribbons for show, no eyeliner. Just grit, laced in every thread I stitched into another soldier's torn body. People often mistook my silence for submission. They were wrong. I was the kind of woman who could go 10 hours without sleep while pumping blood from a field kit into a dying 19-year-old. I had learned to silence the sound of bombs to hear a fading heartbeat. I had written eulogies in my head while inserting chest tubes, praying I would never have to speak them aloud. I had looked death in the eye and said, "Not yet, not this one." My role in the army was not glorious. Combat medics rarely get movies made about them. We show up when the shooting starts and disappear before the camera crews arrive. But I never needed fame. I needed purpose. And I found it in every wrist I wrapped, every breath I coaxed back into broken lungs, every whisper of thank you from someone too weak to raise their voice. But none of that mattered at home. My parents called me reckless when I enlisted. When I returned from my first deployment with a dislocated shoulder and a medal, they asked why I couldn't get a desk job like a normal woman. When I saved an entire unit by performing triage under sniper fire, my mother said, "Maybe now you'll consider getting married." My brother never corrected them. He laughed and let me fade into the corner of family photos, if I even made it into the frame. I didn't speak up. I thought my work would speak for me. But in the Monroe family, if your medals didn't gleam from a jet cockpit, they might as well not exist. And in their eyes, I didn't. The mission was supposed to be routine. That was the word they used in the initial brief. A remote village bordering a no-man's land corridor known for insurgent traps and mine-laced ridgelines. Intelligence suggested a cluster of wounded civilians needing evacuation after an airstrike had flattened 2 medical outposts. I was leading the medical team under Operation Hallowed Dust. We were inserted via ground convoy with clearance for rapid extraction. The region had been cleared of major threats the day before, or so they said. We were to be in and out in 3 hours. Then Travis showed up. He wasn't assigned to my unit. He wasn't even supposed to be in that zone. But a last-minute shift placed him as the strategic operations advisor for the area. When I entered the command tent the day before deployment, he was already there, hands on hips, voice sharp, briefing senior officers on tactical overlays. I nodded, formally. "Lieutenant Monroe," I said. He gave me that smirk, the one that meant nothing good. "Relax, Eliza, I'm here to make sure your med bags don't end up scattered in an ambush." I wanted to challenge him, to question why he was interfering in a low-profile humanitarian op, but I bit my tongue. The chain of command had already nodded. He had clearance. His rank outstripped mine. His charm did the rest. At the final review, I laid out the plan: deploy at 0200, when satellite recon would give us maximum visibility. Travis leaned over the table and said, "Why wait? If we move at 2300, we catch them before insurgents regroup." I frowned. "We'll lose night vision support. And the thermal scan doesn't complete until 0150. We'll be blind." He grinned. "Sometimes speed is the best intel." I responded evenly, "I'm the one on the ground. If it goes south, it's my team bleeding." He shrugged. "You'll manage. You always do." And somehow, despite my objections, the change was approved. The command staff deferred to his assessment. Said it aligned with a broader intel strategy. I spent the next hours trying to adjust plans, recalibrate extractions, and notify logistics. At 2300 we deployed. The convoy was quiet, too quiet. The roads were cleared fast. Too fast. My gut churned. 30 minutes in, the lead vehicle hit a pressure switch. The explosion ripped through the stillness like a scream. Metal and fire flew. I was flung backward, my ears ringing, vision spinning. I scrambled toward the blast site. 3 soldiers down. 2 unresponsive. 1 with half a leg. I began triage under gunfire, dragging bodies behind debris. No air support. Comms scrambled. The evac chopper took fire trying to land. I watched the pilot's face as he crashed into a slope, flames lighting up the ravine. 3 more wounded. 1 of them died in my arms. By dawn, we were a mess of torn fabric, ash, and silence. We lost 3. 6 injured. I was treated for a concussion and torn ligaments in my shoulder. The inquiry came fast. Too fast. 4 men in pressed uniforms sat across from me, questions sharp as scalpels. Why was the operation moved forward? Who authorized the change? I answered calmly, I was advised to accelerate the timeline based on updated field risk. By whom? Major Travis Monroe. They glanced at each other. Was this advice formal? I hesitated. It was strategic input given during joint briefing. And did he sign off on the adjustment? No. The final approval came from Regional Command, who considered his assessment. Which meant nothing would stick. Travis had maneuvered from the shadows. I had made the call. And because I executed it, I bore the fault. He submitted a 2-paragraph statement citing evolving conditions and field discretion. No mention of our conversation. No responsibility. The report blamed me for failure to follow established recon timelines. Suspension. Operational review. Stripped of field command. I packed my things in silence, staring at the name tag on my locker. Monroe, E. The same last name as the man who had just let me fall alone. I went home. I shouldn't have. Maybe I still believed someone would say, "This isn't your fault." But my father met me at the door with arms crossed and said, "Commanders make the hard calls." You made yours. Live with it. My mother stood behind him, eyes down. Travis wasn't even there. I asked where he was. Overseas, she whispered. Important posting. They didn't ask how I was. Didn't ask if I was eating, if I could sleep at night. Only mentioned that the press was quiet, thankfully, that the family name was still intact. That night, I sat alone in my childhood room, full of dust and faded posters, and realized no one was coming. I didn't cry. I just stopped hoping. The days blurred. I reported to a desk job at Regional Medical Command, shuffling logistics files while my field instincts atrophied. Nights were worse. I would wake up choking on phantom smoke, reaching for bodies that were no longer there. Corporal Jameson's blood was still under my fingernails. Even though I had washed my hands 100 times. I stopped returning calls. I stopped trying to prove anything. I let the world forget me. But the thing about forgetting someone like me is that we do our best work when unseen. I had not survived war zones and helicopter crashes to vanish into spreadsheets. A quiet, colder part of me began to take root. Not anger. Something sharper. Resolve. If they were going to leave me to rot under the weight of blame, then I would exhume the truth with my own hands. I started with the mission logs. Getting access was not easy, even for someone with my clearance. But I had friends. Friends who remembered what I had done for them under fire. Friends who still owed me their lives. One of them, a satellite analyst named Rodriguez, met me behind the base cafeteria with a thumb drive. His voice shook when he handed it over. I never saw this, he said. The file contained thermal recon images and chat logs from the day before the mission. The satellite feed showed that the area was not marked high risk until 3 hours after our deployment. Meaning we went in blind, not because the threat escalated, but because someone changed the timeline before intel was ready. Then came the real twist. A message from Travis, timestamped exactly 42 minutes before my final briefing. It was sent to logistics. Recon team pushing back the mission. Eliza's cautious. But trust me, we need to move sooner. I'll handle fallout if needed. I read that line 10 times. I'll handle fallout if needed. But he hadn't. He had let me drown. And worst of all, he knew. I compiled everything. The chat logs. The satellite mismatch. My original recommendation. I cross-referenced timestamps, formal reports, even informal memos. When the file was done, I compressed it, encrypted it, and uploaded it directly to the Office of Military Ethics. No letter, no plea, just one sentence: the truth still matters, even when it is inconvenient. Then I waited, not for applause, just for an answer. 3 months passed. Silence stretched so long I wondered if I had sent it into a black hole. Then came the call. Colonel Myers. She didn't waste time. Lieutenant Monroe, your record has been formally amended. The charges have been retracted. The original decision has been deemed a procedural failure. Your command eligibility is restored. Your clearance is reinstated. We offer our apology. I didn't say anything for a full minute. My voice barely returned. Thank you, ma'am. She continued, you will be transferred to a new unit immediately. And Eliza? You were right to fight. I returned to the field. Not with triumph, but with purpose. I did not speak of what had happened. I did not call home. I redeployed to high-casualty zones in Sudan, led medical evacuation during the California wildfires, and coordinated humanitarian missions after the Puerto Rico hurricane. I became the medic they sent when things were already broken beyond hope. And I delivered hope anyway. Over the next 3 years, I treated 216 wounded. Rescued over 100 civilians. Lost no one under my direct triage. The files spoke for me now. My name began to appear in internal citations. In classified commendations. One morning, I found a memo labeled Priority Transmission. It was from the Joint Chiefs. An official invitation to attend the National Military Valor Ceremony in Washington, D.C. hosted by the President. I stared at it, unmoving. I had forgotten how to react to recognition. But the second I saw the guest list, something inside me shifted. Travis Monroe, Arthur Monroe, both listed as attending, under honors for familial service. My breath caught. They would be there, the ones who erased me, who watched me fall and said nothing. I ironed my uniform until the creases could cut paper. My stars shone at the collar. My medals were not many, but they were earned in sweat and silence. When I arrived, the venue was shimmering with the presence of power. Generals, dignitaries, cameras. I walked past them all, straight-backed. People turned. Some saluted. Others stared. At the far end of the hall, digital screens scrolled names. Eliza Monroe, guest of honor. The moment came. The room stood still. The master of ceremonies announced, "And now, we honor a soldier whose work saved hundreds, who returned from disgrace not with bitterness, but with unmatched service." The commander-in-chief stepped onto the stage. He was older than I expected. His eyes, however, were clear and direct. He pinned the medal over my heart, held my gaze, and said, "You saved more lives than most can even count. And you did it when no one was watching. You redefined service." The applause broke like a wave. I stood, unmoving, not because I was proud, but because I was steady. I had nothing left to prove. When they offered me the microphone, I hesitated. Then I stepped forward and looked into the crowd. My family sat midway down the aisle. My father, hands clenched. My mother, lips parted in disbelief. Travis, face pale, jaw tense. I spoke. I was not supposed to be here. I was not invited to the table before. I was not defended. I was not believed. But I kept walking, kept serving, kept showing up when no one else did. This is not a medal for forgiveness. It is a mark of fact. I did what needed to be done. And I will never apologize for surviving. I stepped back. No smile. Just silence. It was louder than applause. After the ceremony, hands reached for mine. Young cadets in pressed uniforms asked for photos. Veterans clapped my shoulder with eyes that said more than words could. One woman, silver-haired with trembling fingers, pressed a note into my palm. It read, "My son made it home because of you. He talks about a medic who ran into gunfire when everyone else froze. I've prayed for you every day. Thank you." I folded the note and placed it in my breast pocket, over the medal. Over my heart. It was the first thing I kept that day. I lingered at the reception as long as I could before I saw them. My family. A frozen portrait framed in the corner of the ballroom near the tall windows, looking like the past come to stare down the present. I took a slow breath and walked toward them. I didn't quicken my pace. I didn't shrink. I gave them time to notice me. When they did, my father was the first to speak. He didn't say "General." He didn't salute. He just said, "Eliza." His voice had the same clipped edge it always carried when he was disappointed in me. Except this time, it cracked at the end. I met his eyes. The spine that had never bent in uniform now seemed to sag beneath the weight of something else. Not regret. Not shame. Recognition. "You didn't tell us," he said. I tilted my head. "You didn't ask." He flinched, barely, but I saw it. My mother stepped forward, her hands twisted together in the way she used to do when holding back tears. "We didn't know how to believe you," she said quietly. "We thought it would all go away if we stayed silent." I didn't answer. Not right away. I looked to Travis, the golden child. His face had aged in ways that had nothing to do with time. I saw it in the hollow space behind his eyes. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Finally he said, "I didn't mean for it to happen like that." That night, things spiraled. I held his gaze. "No, Travis. Things didn't spiral. You let them. You watched me burn, and when the smoke cleared, you made sure I wasn't standing." He tried again. I didn't know what to say. "You could have told the truth." He had nothing left. I could see it. So I gave him what I'd wanted for years. Closure. Not revenge. Just truth. "I'm not here to shame you. I'm not here to beg for a family reunion. I came because I earned my place. I came because no matter how many times you tried to erase me, I never stopped existing. You can live with that now. You don't have to like it." My mother reached out. I didn't move away. But I didn't move forward either. She said, "We were wrong." I gave her a small nod. "I know. But I stopped needing you to admit it a long time ago." My father's voice came low, heavy. "We thought strength looked like Travis. That medals were louder than quiet work. We were proud of the wrong child." I didn't say thank you. I didn't need to. I took a step back. "You taught me loyalty was the core of family. But then you abandoned me when it was inconvenient. You picked reputation over truth. You believed I failed before you ever asked why. And while you stood beside the one who had everything, you turned your back on the one who built herself from rubble." I looked at each of them in turn. I don't hate you. I just don't need you anymore. They didn't follow me as I left. I hadn't expected them to. The ballroom doors opened and I stepped into the chill of the evening air. Streetlights glowed like stars and the city buzzed with life around me. For the first time in years, I walked without weight. Not because the past was erased, but because I was no longer carrying their voices with me. I had written a new chapter, not to show them, but to finally see myself. Across the plaza, a girl in a junior ROTC uniform ran up to me. She was maybe 16, freckles. Nervous smile. "Are you General Monroe?" she asked, her voice small. I nodded. She held up a notebook. "I read everything they said about you. About what you did. I want to be a field medic one day. Because of you." I crouched to meet her eye level. "Don't wait for people to approve of your purpose," I told her. "Just don't lose it, even when they don't understand. Especially then." She hugged me without warning. I held her back, not because I needed it, but because I knew she might. As she ran back to her group, I stood still, letting the wind press against my face. This medal, this night, it didn't erase the pain. But it reframed it. The people who once called me worthless now had to live in a world where I had saved more than they would ever understand. And I was finally okay with the fact that they'd never say it. Because I no longer needed to be invited into their version of family. I had created something better. A truth that did not rely on their recognition. A legacy built from everything they tried to bury. And in the silence that followed, for the first time, I felt free. There comes a point in life, often after 50, sometimes later, when you stop running after applause. Not because you no longer care what people think, but because you begin to realize how little it ever mattered. That was the quiet revelation I carried with me after the ceremony. Not the weight of medals or titles, but the stillness that comes when your worth is no longer up for debate. I used to think family was defined by blood, by proximity, by obligation. But the older I grew, the clearer it became that real family is made up of those who choose you at your worst. Who hold steady when the narrative turns. I waited years for my family to see me. I whispered truths. I sent signals. I stood quietly in rooms where my voice was never requested. And then I left. Not to disappear, but to stop shrinking. Some people will never say sorry. Some people cannot meet you where you've grown. And that is not a failure of yours. It is the distance they created and were never willing to cross. When I speak to younger soldiers now, or the medics fresh out of training, I tell them this: your integrity is not a group decision. What you know to be right, what you live by in the silence of your choices, that is the mark you leave on this world. Not who claps for you. Not who gives you a seat at their table. In the later chapters of life, we begin to see the full outline of our story. And the painful parts do not fade. They stay. But they become context, not conclusions. What hurt us once becomes the foundation for what we build after. The rejection, the loneliness, the betrayal, they did not break me. They revealed me, piece by piece. And so, to those who have been cast aside by those meant to love them, to anyone carrying scars that still whisper at night, I say this: you do not need their permission to thrive. You do not need their belief to matter. You only need the courage to keep becoming who you were meant to be. Long after they stopped looking. And one day, when you stand in a room full of people who call you worthy, you will realize you always were. They just weren't ready to see it.